What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Grayson from Lightworker. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. You released a couple of new singles off of your new album, Fury by Failure, one of them being The Willing Martyr. Like, could these singles that you released almost serve as like a clear representation of what the whole album is going to sound like, or is this just scratching the surface?
Honestly, if I had to pick one of the two, I would say scratching the surface. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of other elements musically and vocally in the record that haven't really been touched on yet. So, yeah, I would definitely say that.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the making of Fury by Failure, you want to talk about like how the making of it was, like in terms of like the recording, songwriting, mixing, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I mean, honestly, this whole project was kind of, I mean, it was kicked off by us, the band, and basically what we did is we started writing songs to this. I mean, to be honest, since it's our debut record, like there are some stuff on this, like at least like parts of songs that have been written for about 6 years, right? So it's like someone may have had something way back when that never found a home in a song, and that got pulled in. I think the oldest full song is probably about, I want to say like 5 years old or something like that. But, you know, we've kind of just been writing, the majority of it was written, I want to say, over the last 2 to 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. When it came down to actually recording the record and getting to a place where we're like, all right, let's, you know, we did our EP, and then pretty soon after that, honestly, we were already thinking about the record because it took us a while to release the EP. So once we started talking about that, we actually kind of built our own team around the record, just in terms of, for example, our buddy Daniel, who's in Phineas and Fit for a King, also label mates. He produced the instruments for the record, so he did the music. So that whole process, honestly, was us going down to see him down in Southern California and basically recording with him at his place. And then, actually, believe it or not, it was kind of a mix of that and him coming up here a couple of times to my place. So the whole music thing was actually done in somewhat of a bedroom scenario, I guess, or like bedrooms that have been converted into studios. Mm-hmm. And then for vocals, we had, you know, gotten with our manager, Chris, and he recommended Bo from Seosin, who also is an awesome producer, and he actually had worked, he had done vocals and mixing on Chris's band 100 Sons, and that was kind of the catalyst to consider Bo to do the exact same thing for our record. So we got Bo on board to actually produce and engineer, record all of the vocals, and then also do the mix for the record. So between basically Daniel and Bo, we kind of created that team that put this record together with us, and it was great.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
That's interesting. You mentioned that you were working on these songs for a very, very long time. So are what we're going to hear on the album, is this how they were originally made, or was there a lot of changes between when the songs were like first, you know, set in stone to now?
If I'm going to be completely honest, the songs themselves didn't really go through too much change. So, for example, when I was talking about the oldest song on the record, that technically was actually slated for the EP, but it didn't feel right to put out on such a small list of songs. It kind of felt more like it needed an album behind it. So that song, how it is on the record, is actually very close to how it was originally done. And a lot of the other songs too, at least for me personally, I find that I don't really tend to, I know that some songwriters, right, they'll tend to, when they're writing a song, even if they're not sure about a part, sometimes they'll just go, okay, I'm just gonna do this for now, maybe leave it as a placeholder and I'll fix it later, you know what I mean? And for me personally, it's more so if I get stuck on a part, I don't know if this is good or not, I actually tend not to move on to the next part unless I'm stoked on it.
Well, you know what? As an artist myself, I could say I relate to you so much because it's going to be so hard to like move on to something knowing that there's something that you're stuck on in the back of your mind, and then it could screw up everything else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like I just do not like that feeling of like, oh, I got this thing here that I really don't like. I'm like, well, I don't really want it there then. I'm just going to leave it blank until I come up with something really cool. And that's also why sometimes it takes me a while to write some songs. Like I'll have, I'll write like a minute, I'll get through the first chorus and then I'm just like, okay, now that's going to get tabled for about 2 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When it comes to like songwriting, do you find it maybe easier to come up with ideas when you're in the company of your other bandmates, or do you kind of, isolation's always the greatest fuel for an artist? So, or do you like come up with stuff easier when you're like alone in a way?
Um, It depends, but honestly, if I have to pick one, I'd probably say I come up with my best stuff when I'm just by myself and I've had enough time to, I don't know, kind of just be away from some stuff for a while to come back and feel rejuvenated to actually start, once I pick up a guitar and say, like, all right, like, I actually kind of feel like I have this idea and it'll go by much quicker. Like, it'll come out much quicker if I'm just by myself cranking it out. The funny thing, though, is our singer Joe is somewhat the opposite. So he thrives on when him and I are in a room together and just bouncing off ideas, which, we also do really well together. But that's like really his vibe, as opposed to me. Sometimes it's like I'll be isolated by myself, just in my studio working on stuff, and then when I get stuck and really stuck to the point where it's not even like, oh, I kind of have a vision for where this is going, but I just don't know how to put that down yet or what that exactly looks like. If I don't even have that, then I'll usually go to him and be like, all right, I have no idea what is next. Like, what do you think could be next? And then that's what he really likes to do.
That's a really interesting like sort of concoction right there. Two songwriters who need the complete opposite sources of inspiration.
Yeah, but at the same time, we we also like we equally push each other in the other like person's direction, just in terms of like I always like try to encourage him to like write a lot of stuff on his own, which I mean he does well very much. It's just like not as much in his comfort zone as it is for me, and then vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Like he'll push me more to like write stuff from scratch, like in a group. So and a lot of this record was kind of like that, us doing our own thing, but then also pushing each other to do what we, aren't as comfortable with yet. But, I think that's actually what made the dynamic pretty cool writing on this record.
Yeah, kind of like a similar question to the first question I asked, but you released the Resilience EP before, so like for people who may have been like who have discovered that, could that almost be like maybe like a preview of what is to come on the full length, or being that this is the first full length album, you kind of wanted to start fresh in a way?
Yeah, so, okay, well, interesting tidbit about that. So I would say, plainly, I would probably say, stylistically, it could be similar, but I mean, to me, the full length is very different. Partially because, so, long story short, the EP was written when the band was actually just getting started. So this band started with Joe and actually our former guitar player, Nick, who's still a really good friend of ours, and he has an awesome studio here in the Bay Area, and he's a really good engineer and producer. So it actually started with them, and the EP was actually written by the two of them as they were finishing and like filling out the lineup for the band. So for example, our like Nick brought in the other guitar player and our drummer at the time, and then Joe brought in me, funny enough, on bass. Like I didn't even starting the band playing my main instrument on guitar. I was doing bass and backing vocals.
And then you got promoted.
Yeah, well, because I had just parted with my last band, like literally within a month, and Joe and I met up, like reconnected at a Papa Roach show of all places, because I was seeing a band, like some friends of mine who I had toured with, who were opening the tour, and Joe, like I would never think to see him at a Papa Roach show in a million years, but he was there, and he kind of told me about the project, and I was like, I definitely am going to need a performance outlet at least, you know what I mean? Since I just parted with my last band. So that's kind of how I got in. But anyways, like every member besides Joe and our old guitar player weren't in the band when the EP was being written. And actually, I think it was like within a month or two after Joe and I had that conversation about kind of me joining, the two of them actually went to Nashville and recorded the EP. So the EP had been done for about honestly, like if you look at to when the EP was actually written, like the EP is 5 years old at this point, even though it was released, what is it, like 3 years ago now? So the fact that it's that old, and also the fact that this record, instead of like the two primary songwriters being Joe and our old guitar player Nick, like in this one, like I actually wrote on this album. So this was like Joe and I doing a whole lot of stuff, and I had a whole lot of I guess like ideas and sorts of songs that I really wanted to dive into and explore that I didn't really feel like I had the opportunity to do. Like in, for example, in my past project, like, you know, over the last 6 or 7 years. So I had a lot of pent up, like, you know, creative energy that I needed to just get out. And so, yeah, I would say that it's definitely different in regards to that. But
interesting. In terms of your guitar work, do you have like a theoretical background in a way that you are working off of for reference, or do you tend to improvise and you're more of the self-taught level?
Definitely more of the self-taught level. Anything that I've learned about, I mean, in terms of theory that I do use, like things about scales or you know, keys or whatever and all that stuff, that was all learned by me learning songs back in the day that I just loved. That's how I learned to play guitar. I would just look up tabs on Ultimate Guitar and I would just start learning songs over and over. And my motivation to get better was when I came across a song that I really, really liked, but then I tried to learn it and I was like, oh, crap. Like, this is really hard. And I just pushed myself to get better so that I could play that song. And then I started noticing patterns in the songs I was learning. You know, like, oh, like they use this progression a lot in these songs and it sounds really cool. And then started to realize, like, oh, there are patterns here. Oh, these are scales. Like, this is a key. Though I actually do have some music theory background in college. I was a split major with music, but that came a little bit later.
Okay. Never too late to learn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, being that this is the debut album, was there kind of like a preconceived idea that you guys were revolving around in terms of Fury by Failure, like it has to sound this way, or did this kind of just happen more organically and almost in a way like by accident?
Definitely organic and by accident, in a sense. I know that at the beginning when we had been talking about the record, I love Joe to death. He's always this guy. It was like, so what do we want this? What are we going for? I feel like if we have this idea and this direction, like that'd be super cool. And I was like, look, I totally agree. But I was like, for me, for example, it's like like I said before, there were so many things that I kind of just felt like I wanted to get out, and without any sort of, I guess, like artificial barriers of, you know, let's try to aim for this or do that, which, by the way, I think would be awesome for a second record. But I was like, for right now, I feel personally like I kind of I have to just go with what's going to come out. And so that's, and we talked about it and we kind of agreed like, okay, yeah, that would be pretty cool to do. So we just wrote songs that we wanted to hear, you know, we just wrote what we wanted to hear. We wrote what we liked. And of course that comes with the caveat of, you know, we're not just going to say, oh, I'm going to write whatever I want. And then even if it sounds bad, we're going to put it on the records. Like, no, of course we still all had to be super into it.
Yeah.
But,
oh yeah, you were saying?
No, I was going to say at least musically, that's kind of what the approach was. But then, of course, like working with Daniel and working with Bo, you know, we kind of naturally just kind of dropped into a certain feel, which I think made things seem a little bit more cohesive. And even vocally, of course, like Joe lyrically. Thematically, there's a lot of things happening on this record, like lyrically, that tie everything together, if that makes sense. But speaking from more of a musical aspect, it started out as just being very, let's just write what we want to hear.
Yeah, and it's funny because it sounds like you guys all have like different inspirations and stuff. So like you want to write what you want to write, but you also want to keep the record consistent. You don't want to make something that sounds like Napalm Death on one song and then make another song that sounds like I don't know, My Chemical Romance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
Oh boy! All right, let's do it.
How do you know when a song is done?
Oh.
And please don't say I'd like to buy a vowel. I've gotten that way too much.
I mean, I think a song is done usually when just time runs out, where you can't work on it anymore, or you kind of, I don't know, or you kind of just feel like it's in a place where you're happy with it and satisfied, and if you left it right now, even if you know like you're going to go back in 2 years and listen to it, of course, and say, oh, I wish I would have done that, because in 2 years from now your influences are going to be very, very different, looking at it from a completely different lens. But as long as like in that moment of time you feel like it's captured what you wanted to do, then I feel like the song is done.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I give you a mid-level applaud for that answer. Not the best, but not the worst.
Cool.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions for you, but now, of course, it's a matter of playing this material live. We went fully in depth into the songwriting, but maybe, is there anything creatively that kind of ties into playing live and songwriting together, or would you say playing live and songwriting are almost like two separate arts that you have to master?
That's actually a really good question. I mean, I think, for me, whenever I'm writing songs, like even if I'm isolated by myself, just like me in front of my computer and all that stuff, I still think of it from the lens of, okay, maybe you got the rhythm here, and then, is the other guitar going to be doing the same thing? Is there a lead that should accompany it? So I do think of it from the lens of, you have a 4 or 5 piece band that you're working with, and, making sure that those bases are covered. But then outside of that, it can turn into, sometimes I forget, it's like, okay, well, what does the song need? So sometimes I think the learning curve there is actually being able to separate from when you need to think about live, in terms of like who are the members in the band, and we want to make sure that, for example, if this is like a full band song, that we don't have someone sitting out for 2/3 of it, versus being able to say, okay, I think that we need to add these other textures or this color, and then the live implementation is kind of an afterthought. Like those little things I feel like we just figure out after. But it's like the core, as long as like the core meat is there when we're writing, I feel like the live stuff kind of works itself out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like, do you almost like have to write a song like taking into account, okay, what is this going to sound like when we play it live with the audience there, and we're playing through a PA system where God knows what the settings are and that and everything like that?
Right. So, I guess there's actually 2 parts to that, because one, you could write a song thinking about, okay, how are we going to pull this off live? And then there's the other side of it where you use live as the inspiration, saying, imagine us playing this song live, right? Like that riff, is that a live riff? Like how sick would that be in a crowd of people? Mm-hmm. But yeah, in terms of execution, I don't think we've had to think about it too much, to be completely honest. It's kind of just naturally, because at least Joe and I, we've actually been in bands together for a while, and like back when we actually did all write in a garage together, I feel like that's kind of the beginning of where our quote-unquote songwriting began. So that's kind of just ingrained at this point of, looking at it from the scope of how are we going to play this as a group.
Fair enough, and that's a very logical formula that you have. I think you have the best of both worlds. You could execute something that's technically impressive, and you could bring it to the live audience, but there's also room for error or experimentation to keep the live presence, not just because I mean just to stand on stage and make it like a practice session that people are witnessing is got to be pretty boring for both the audience and you guys, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else with Lightworker that you would like to promote? The new album's scheduled to come out on June 12th, right?
Yeah, June 12th.
Yep, on Solid State Records. Obviously, thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named, I don't want to give it any promotion. But shows are obviously on hold for a second, but as soon as this is all over, I'd imagine we'll be seeing Lightworker on the road, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we wanted to be on the road pretty much now, but we're gonna we got to work around what we got to work around.
Yeah, but as soon as this is over, please come to New York.
Yeah, definitely want to do that.
Awesome. But thank you so much, Grayson. We are here with Grayson of Lightworker, Fury by Failure, coming out via Solid State Records on June 12th. Buy it then when supplies last forever, and we will see you next time on Heavy New York.